Good morning and welcome back to Planet Althistory. Today we are going to discuss what if Lukashenko took over Russia. Lukashenko would take over Russia in a military conquest, not through changing nationalities or suddenly becoming a Russian. No, Lukashenko's life would still remain the same and unchanged in this scenario up until a certain part. Let's take a look at Russia in the 90s. I'm sure that many Russians don't really have fond memories of Russia in the 90s for very good reasons. The economy in Russia was performing really badly. Everything became suddenly privatized. An oligarchy was formed by former Communist Party members and some smart yet ruthless people. Infrastructures deteriorated all across Russia. Smaller shops, they disappeared from villages. And to make matters worse, conflicts were brewing left and right, in particular in Chechnya, for instance. From 1991 to 1998, Russia lost 40% of its GDP. The inflation was really high as 80%, and as a result, the 90s are remembered as the worst time in Russian history and also in some former Soviet republics. Yeltsin was not a popular politician and he knew that. Yeltsin and his advisors were thinking how they could just have at least one success, and that's how the idea of the Union state with Belarus and Russia came into existence. Belarus was the only former Soviet republic that didn't have a negative view of Russia and a Russian political intervention. The intention was to achieve a federation like the Soviet Union with a common head of state, legislature, flag, coats of arms, anthem, constitution, army, citizenship and currency. The union was ratified by Russia on the 22nd of December 1999 and by Belarus on the 26th of January 2000. On the latter date, the treaty and the union came into effect. But what about Lukashenko now? And how would he actually rule Russia? Well, as I said, this federation would create something like the Soviet Union, and as a result, Lukashenko would automatically have a citizenship that would allow him to run for a presidential election in this federation between Belarus and Russia. So no need to change the nationality because he would automatically get a nationality that would enable him to do so. And not only that, but Lukashenko was viewed very favorable by the public of Belarus and even Russia for some time. He was seen as a person who could bring back the stability of the old glorious days. The Russian elite also believed that Lukashenko would be a good person to rule Belarus and Russia alike. While Yeltsin, well, he would anyways retire. Everything seemed to go according to Lukashenko's plan, and he even toured around Russia, which could be an interpretation of some electoral campaign, until Yeltsin named Putin as his successor. Bam! But what if that never happened? What if Lukashenko took over Russia? A very simple point of divergence we could propose is that Yeltsin never names Putin as his successor, and as a result there would be elections not only of Russia or of Belarus, but of this union state, with the support of the oligarchy nostalgic of the Soviet Union and probably also some simple people who would just like the program of Lukashenko. Lukashenko would become president of this union between Russia and Belarus. In the first years that he would rule, he would need to address very basic things like, for instance, the common currency, the coat of arms, the flag, constitution, army, etc. And I think in there also with the reform of the administrations and stuff like this, he would try to take certain modifications of a more USSR style, and he would also try to slightly modernize and adapt Soviet-inspired things. The economy won't change that much at first, because Lukashenko, he wouldn't just be able to do so due to the oligarchy and the fact that they also supported him and you're not actually biting the hand that feeds you at first. Another problem he would face would be the war in Chechnya, but I believe that Lukashenko would also be able to solve this crisis, but a bit differently. The only problem he would have would be to find some support among the ethnic Chechens, and honestly I don't think that he would place someone like Kadyrov as Chechen leader. But he would choose someone else who would still be Muslim and Chechen nonetheless. Terrorist attacks would still happen, such as the Moscow theater hostage crisis, and Lukashenko would still come out as a popular leader after solving these issues. Lukashenko, who was supported by the oligarchy throughout all that alternate time, would however try to plot slowly and surely against them, once the time would be ripe. He would make similar moves as Putin. He would try to extend his power during times of high popularity, and several politicians who would be against his rule, well, they would disappear. And once his popularity would go low, he would always be able to reach higher popularity by promising an enlargement of the Union. Why? Well, Kazakhstan's President Nursultan Nazarbayev had already asked Russia in 1994 to make a similar move with Kazakhstan instead of Belarus. Seeing how the union actually worked out, I think that Kazakhstan could have even higher interest to have this union with this bigger Russia, or well, Russia-Belarus in that case. And let's also not forget the fact that Kazakhstan was in search of an identity, and they didn't really have a proper identity until very recently. Lukashenko could thus gain a boost in his popularity, and at the same time he might promise the oligarchy certain special rights in places like Kazakhstan, later on also Kyrgyzstan, as long as they would continue their support with him. And this would give him the upper hand, and he could slowly but surely stop certain privatizations and even roll back certain privatization that was done beforehand, especially with companies that belonged to some oligarchs who alienated themselves from Lukashenko and all of the oligarchy. He needs to be very careful about who he would like to remove. Well, I'm not also saying that all the oligarchy will just happen to become weak and do whatever Lukashenko says, but he would go very planned and carefully about who he would remove. And also people who would suddenly have good deals with the West, well, in there he could actually take all the opinion of the public and make these oligarchs look as traitors to the nation. And let's not forget that Lukashenko is this type of politician who likes to go to the field and pose himself as somebody who works, who is with the normal citizen, and who sympathizes also with the normal citizens. People would see him as one of them and not really as somebody who is sponsored by the elite, but someone who would actually try to be on the same eyesight as the elite themselves. So the simple population would see themselves being really good represented by Lukashenko, and as someone who would stop the elite from doing whatever they wanted and bringing them to the table and negotiating many points in favor to the simple population, of course. And this would also make it more difficult for the oligarchy to suddenly replace Lukashenko with someone else who was not known without angering the population. Over the years, Lukashenko would effectively become the most powerful man of the Union, officially and, well, unofficially, of course. The economy would slightly improve because Lukashenko would not send cheap oil and gas to other countries, as his former country Belarus would anyways be part of this whole union. Moreover, he would also try to build factories which would refine these resources. He could also ask higher prices from the West, especially, which they would have to pay. But if the West chose to give Lukashenko what he asked for, what he wanted, he would then also come in handy and just decrease the prices again. Agriculture would also become the backbone of the Russian economy, And I also think that Lukashenko would try to support more innovative sectors such as the blockchain sector, for instance, because in OTL, Lukashenko declared that everything related to blockchain, Bitcoin and cryptocurrency would be tax-free for a limited amount of time. In geopolitics, Lukashenko, he could flip-flop a few times, only if it would be convenient for him to do so. Actually, saying flip-flop is the wrong term in that sense, because Lukashenko, in my eyes, is a politician who applies the principles of a realpolitik, and he may have better ties to the West than Putin does in OTL up until a certain time, where also Lukashenko then would be declared as some kind of enemy to the West and someone who threatens world peace and security. Kazakhstan and also Kyrgyzstan would become part of the wider Union state, and perhaps even Moldova together with Transnistria, especially in times before elections or when Lukashenko's popularity would nosedive. Another effect we would see is that Poland may become even more anti-Russian than in OTL, and probably Poland would become the biggest NATO base of Europe. More money would be spent in Poland and also the Baltics to face this so-called Russian threat, which is now even closer because Belarus doesn't exist. Lukashenko would, however, not intervene in any of these countries, and he would most likely try to annex through diplomatic means more territories. It is also possible that while he would be more neutral toward China, he would help the countries around China to have ties with Russia and give them an alternative, like Mongolia, for instance. Lukashenko could make Russia bigger, more unpredictable, but because of that it would make him more powerful. Would Lukashenko later on side with the West and block China's growth, or would he actually collide with the West and become a temporary ally to China? Or could he create a bloc that is powerful enough to stand on its own against China and against the West? And that's where we leave it for now. That's it for today. I hope you enjoyed my video. Be sure to like and subscribe, leave a comment, support me also on Patreon, and join my forum, forum.planetalthistory.ga. Until next time on Planet Alt History.